let's just kind of roll into it. So, hey, MonDarryl, it's so nice to be able to sit down and talk with you again. When we last spoke, the conversation was so riveting and informative. I wanted to share your valuable insights and expertise with my caregivers in this space, my caregivers who care for elderly loved ones. And in light of this being Black History Month, today our session is provocatively entitled Caregiving While Black. And so, with this, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you become an authority in this caregiving space.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much, Donna, for having me here. It's always a pleasure to connect with you and connect with like-minded folks who are in the community, rendering services, figuring out how to, and we can fill in that blank of what how to is. But so I've become an authority figure in this space. So I work as an EAP trainer, and I do incident counseling, incident report counseling, on site for when there are major incidents, deaths on site at employer sites or whatever. And what we come to oftentimes is how do we continue to house or center mental health in these very difficult, complex spaces, right? How do we cater to the whole person that shows up in the workforce, right? And so now when we talk about caregiving, it's really important for me to show up, not just as a trainer, not just as a counselor, right? But as a person who has had to caregive. My mother, prior to transitioning, I was her primary caregiver. And the toll that took on me, right? And my desire to want to help others as I look with hindsight to say, oh man, how much more could I have enjoyed this experience being her caregiver and giving her the gift of caretaking versus the burden of it and how I felt about that at the time.
Wow, that gosh. Okay, this is going to be good. Okay, we're going to just flow here. I have a list of prepared questions, and I can see that these are going to get tossed. Okay, because I'm going to just let you flow here. But let me start us off because, as you know, there are so many dimensions of caregiving, and we can just take off in any one direction, right? I want to try to bring this kind of a holistic view and possibly touch a little bit on a lot of different things. So I don't want it to be isolated to just one track. And I can see that we're going to be jumping around a bit. So let me kind of start us off in the direction of how can we as Black caregivers best advocate for ourselves? And does that advocacy look different for us versus others?
Oh, oh man, that's such a loaded question, Donna. That is such a loaded question. So first thing that comes to mind is when we talk about advocacy, I really think about the ability to promote one's needs. That's really what we're talking about, right? The ability to promote one's desires. And there's an enmeshment of that. What I think about is first things first, when we talk about advocacy, is setting clear boundaries. I cannot state that enough, right? Your boundaries need to look like what are you willing to engage in a manner that allows you to still give the gift of caretaking and also presents you in somewhere in that center to say, okay, I'm giving this gift of service, but I'm also taking from it in a way that, benefits me. I can see the health from it. I can see that it's going to have long-term benefits, right? Stay present with it. So that's first things first, right? Making sure that you set clear boundaries around where you can show up and where you cannot, simply stated, right? I know oftentimes when we care for our loved ones, particularly aging parents or autistic children, the first thing we think is, I have to be available. I have to be available. I have to be available. No days off, no time off. When in essence, that's just not true. What we start to consider at that point is we start seeing higher rates of burnout. That burnout then carries from the household into the workforce, right? And then if you're in the workforce as a caretaker and you're taking that back home with you, now you start to see things like compassion fatigue on the heels of burnout, right? You just don't have capacity anymore. So setting clear boundaries around what you can and cannot do. How can you show up? How do you withdraw? Second thing I would say is something that is overlooked is, which the first was a long answer, but I'll promise this will be short, Donna, is making sure that you speak towards your political presence where you have capacity. Show up politically. Find out what is happening in your community, right? Oftentimes, elder care homes are being built in spaces and they too are rejected, like almost like low income housing, right? We don't want elder care homes here in our community. Why? Because it's a targeted population. Why? Because it's not tax bearing as such, right? So then you get all these different conversations. Find out what's happening in your political landscape. Advocate for your parents to have safe housing, decent housing, things of that nature, your autistic children as well. Lastly, make sure that you exact in terms of advocacy some form of living will, some sort of living directive, such that if something were to happen to this person or something were to happen to you, what should happen in those places, right? Those are 3 buckets of advocacy that I cannot state clear enough. Know what boundaries you have. How can you show up? How can you not? Engage your political landscape, not just for housing alternatives, but care alternatives. And then lastly, making sure that you stay connected with one, that self-care piece, but then as I said, as I close out on the tail end, also making sure that you show up for the legal aspects, right? Get a living will, get a directive, make sure that those things are in place before transitions could happen further that really cause the grief process to be even more challenging.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I want to hone in on that last piece in particular and how that that aspect of advocacy shows up or manifests in our community specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So you have provided us with some action items, some tangible things that we should be doing, we can be doing. And what I want to talk to MonDarryl is the obstacles that present themselves and make it difficult for us to actually carry out those actions. So historically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, these conversations in our families, in our community, they have what you tell us, because I already know what happens when we try to broach the subject of putting this legal documentation in place. Let's talk about the obstacles. How do we overcome the obstacle to taking the action, specifically in our community?
So one, I want to say to that, like, I think in terms of normalizing one, right? We have to, it's just like mental health. And I believe that this is an extension of that, Donna, right? When we start talking about mental health, this is the extension of that piece where we talk about the preparation for transition. And sometimes when we hear the word transition, that can be jarring because what we think of is death. I intentionally eliminate that word so that we could focus specifically on transition, right? Transition occurs while we're alive, right? While we're here. So when we see our parents aging, what does this look like? Do they have a living directive, right? And what barriers do we have? Like, well, we don't want to approach this conversation because it's really sensitive, right? And nobody wants to talk to mom or dad about, that time because it frightens us and we're afraid. But baby, let me tell you something. We're all going to transition, every last one of us. And so the worst time, as Bruce Lee said it, is to prepare for a fight is when you're in one versus preparing before you enter the fight, right? And
That's
what
right.
catches us off guard oftentimes is that death meets us before preparation.
Oh,
And we have to begin preparing for that space. And it's not that we're preparing for that transition of death, but we're preparing for that transition for the next phase of life, right? So we can't be fearful around releasing mom, dad, the child with disabilities or that disabled family member. We've got to approach this with a space of empowerment. This allows us to ready ourselves, right? So that we could actively engage what does next look like, whatever that is. Then we have the traditional space where, culturally, Donna, where we start talking about money, right? So-and-so
Yes.
doesn't have money. They got sick and, they're unable to afford this care that they need. We can't put insurance on them. Or who's going to place it? All those things. And my thing is first get together the understanding of who are the caretakers, right? What can they contribute? What can the person who is being cared for contribute? And then devise a plan of action. But don't put the cart before the horse, right? Because we start to frustrate ourselves by processes that haven't occurred yet. Focus on who's available.
Yes.
Focus on what's needed. And then move into the action phase.
That is all right, folks. This is some great advice that we're being given by our expert here, MonDarryl LaTrez, in this specific space. He shows up in this world as a Black male caregiver. Okay. A bit of a unicorn. Statistics tell us that the majority of caregivers will be women, are women, have been women. And MonDarryl, when you started your quotes, it made me think of a quote from, the recently late Rosalind Carter, who said, there are 4 types of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And it's just so powerful because that brings me to a statement that is just daunting, and people do not really understand the inevitability of this. So the quote
Mhm.
is, and I may be paraphrasing here, but the quote is, to avoid the inevitable is to be naive. None
Agreed.
of us, right? This is going to happen. If we're lucky, we'll get older, but we're going to be transitioning. And to your very point, we've been transitioning ever since we came out of the womb. We're in a state of transition from, different parts of our lives: an infant, a toddler, a child, a young adult. All of these things, we're constantly transitioning. And as soon as we master the one season, we're transitioning to the next,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's just life cycle. And so you also talked about something that I think is very critical, especially in the Black community. When you're speaking about the caregiver, a lot of times we can easily identify the sole caregiver, that one person who the lion's share of the caregiving, it falls on them. Can you talk to us about what it would look like, and how it even would help us in that mental health space to curate a care team, and what a care team looks like?
Mm. Yeah, this is a good one. I like this one. I like this question a lot. Thank you. I think when we talk about curating our care team, like you said, in any family, and I don't want to relegate this one to just Black folks, because I've seen this consistently throughout families, right? That connective thread is that we can easily identify the responsibility of the primary person, the lion's share, right? But curating a care team with intent looks like, who's going to be responsible for the financial aspects, right? Who's going to execute the physical aspects? Are those shared responsibilities? Physically, not saying that we need to take care of this person, right? Because our parents may be able to maneuver their home easily, right? Can bathe themselves without needing or requiring support, but they need someone to physically check in on them every now and then, because as we age, it doesn't have to be dementia. We're sometimes forgetful. Mom left the tea kettle on. Who's going to check on her every so often to make sure Monday, Wednesday, Friday, etc., right? Who's going to also be responsible for making sure that we keep up with doctor's appointments? right? Who
Right.
has the numbers? Where are those numbers stored? Who has dad's insurance? Where are those documents stored, right? Making sure that we curate a team, not just internally with our family, but also extending that to the professionals as well, right? Who's the point of contact for all of these persons, right? And then drafting it in so that that communication is given to the family, right, about this one particular person. So curating your team doesn't just look like your internal family, it also looks like the extended family. And I got newsflash for you. Sometimes that extended family looks like your professional providers, right?
Mm.
And particularly where we're talking about in-home healthcare. If you're talking about a CNA that's at home, right, you need to know exactly what he, she, or they are doing at every point. It needs to be clearly communicated with them, what you anticipate will happen with your loved one, right? And then drafting them in on that care so that they know. It's almost like a working document of sorts.
Mhm.
We're consistently updating, we're consistently communicating out, we're consistently communicating in, right? And this is what I lastly say to that: the curation of a healthy care team, in my opinion, Donna, looks like communicating often and communicating early. I'll say
Mm.
that again because I can't understand communicating often and communicating early. Oftentimes, some of the frustrations that we experience as caregivers often is at the heels of miscommunication or something we thought was communicated but wasn't. So making sure that we communicate often and early, just as we apply that to business practices, we have to
Mhm.
apply that to our personal practice.
Oh, MonDarryl, I love that so much. You made me think of what happens when families find themselves suddenly in a caregiving season with their elderly parents. And, you look around, if you are fortunate enough to have siblings, you know, then you look around and you kind of do an assessment. Who is in the best position at this time, at this specific time, to take on, a lot of these caregiving tasks? But it also made me think of how we come into this a lot of times with an unrealistic expectation of what it will require from each of us.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
unfortunately, that sole caregiver, especially if they're designated by the family, or even if they step up and volunteer, because this is something we haven't done before, I think most people jump into this with what they've heard about this,
Yeah,
right? A
yeah.
lot of people, now not most people, I mean not all people, but a lot of people, if you're in a season of preparing to have a baby for the first time, I would, you know, say that most people are going to read up a little bit, a little bit on what we're getting ready to
Yeah,
get into here, right? And that
yeah,
doesn't,
yeah.
that regardless of what the familial status is, right? But with this on the other end of that, right? So we're talking about birth. Now we're talking about transitioning and things like that. A lot of people don't research this. They don't look into, okay, what does this look like realistically? And let me read up on how other people have done this successfully without going through burnout. Most people think of the people that they know who tore up the family, right? Because the family
Mm-hmm.
started the infighting, uh, burnt out, caregiver fatigue, lost their job. Like you just go there because you know people who have this has been their experience. So I love that you said to prepare early. Prepare. And to your point, it will make it less daunting, less scary, because there are more and more resources out there, such as yourself, who are walking encyclopedias in this very space.
Yeah, and I think it can be understated that when we talk about it, you said something that, and this just occurred to me real time. And I know I've said it 1,000 times, Donna, but it just occurred to me what I think, and I could be wrong. I would love to hear from your viewers about what do they think this may mean, but um, oftentimes it's not that we are afraid of the end thing, whatever that end thing may be, right? We can call the elephant out and say that it's death, but we're afraid of transition, right? Because transition represents so much of the unknown.
Mhm.
And when we talk about the complexity of the unknown, we also touch on something that for us is culturally relevant. And that's what you mentioned, I heard, was cultural competence around how do we get engaged ahead of this thing, right? Because we don't exactly know what this is going to cost us in terms of becoming caregivers, but we're just going to show up. And that is the unrealistic expectation that you can just show up, right?
Yes.
Uh, you don't prepare to cook an amazing meal for the family for Thanksgiving, just trying to show up saying, yeah, I'm just going to show up, but I don't go grocery shopping. I don't go buy any of the things I need. I don't go and cook or prep any of the food, because you understand in order for that transition for folks to eat to happen, there has to have been some shopping. There has to have been a list created. There has to have been, some preparation, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
We've got to become unafraid of transition. And what that looks like simply is preparing. We all are aware that at some point we're going to come to the sunset of our lives, right? That's just an obvious thing. There isn't anything that draws breath that will not approach its sunset. So I don't always know that that's the fear that we're concerned of as much as preparing for the sunset, because that realizes in some way, it's almost like it materializes this thing happening, when the truth is it's going to happen whether you want it to or not. But it materializes the preparation aspects of it, so that those who are left behind or those who are remaining or who are present, right? Because again, transition doesn't always look like death. Transition looks like those who are alive. And I love that you said something about birth. Birth is a very real transition in life. And you read up on it, prepare for it, because you know that's a major transition.
Mhm.
Well, so is everything else, right?
Yes.
So is this pace of caring for your aging parents or your disabled child that is maybe autistic, on the spectrum, whatever that looks like. Let's just prepare.
Yeah. Let's prepare. Yeah, and by getting like this content and so much content like this out, the more we can just disperse this, you know, in the hopes that someone will see it and say, "Oh, wow, okay, let me kind of take off the rose-colored glasses and get to work here." And by doing that, it makes it less burdensome on the back end, right?
Agreed.
And just knowing that all of our lives, we can do hard things. We've done hard things in our lives. So we can do hard things. And actually making the determination to do the hard thing on the front end or on the back end, which we know on the back end is exponentially harder, because now you have the overlay of grieving and that
Mhm.
process. And the emotions are at an all-time high. And so, yeah, it's such a sobering time of life. One of the things I love to do, and when I coach my caregivers, is I tell them that everything that you need for this season, it's on the inside of you. In some way, shape, or form, you are actually prepared more than you think you are. Okay,
Agreed.
and now is the time to put a demand on every gift that has been deposited on the inside of you, because it's going to take all of that
Love
to
it. I love
sustain
that.
you. Yeah. And Mondare, let's talk about some more of the wellness aspect of it. So you talked about the politicizing this and going into our communities and what that looks like, would you say that this space, caregiving as a Black man in society for your elderly loved ones, would you say that what you experience in that space is a microcosm of what you experience in every other space in your life? Or is it different, better or worse? Better or worse.
So this is also a good question, man. I got to tell you, Donna, you're coming with the questions today. You are coming with the questions today. But I think it depends on the experience, right? And it depended on the day, right? Particularly when I was caring for my mom. So I'll share a little bit of my backstory. I had graduated from college not much earlier, right? Accepted an offer, but then turned down that offer to come home and take care of my mom because her health started to fail. We knew it, but I at the time was the only child that had the flexibility to move as I did. And so I came back home from Atlanta. I went home and took care of her. And some of the stairs, I can tell you from nurses when I would attend doctor's appointments, or this was the more amazing thing. So for those of you who aren't aware, just to give a color in my background a little bit, my master's degree is in healthcare administration with an emphasis on community counseling. And I went on to study behavior afterwards. So I would, intentionally engage in these spaces with a certain degree of ignorance because I knew that in order for me to help my mom, I need to come in unassuming, right? Because if I came into the space as like this healthcare expert, I would get superficial treatment that could, in my opinion, interrupt how my mom was treated, how her care team responded to her, and particularly being Black, right? In a predominantly white state, in a predominantly white neighborhood, and by a predominantly white care team. Because if I come in too hot, I'm a threat, asking too many questions, right? So you could see the looks on their faces when they would say certain things, and I would ask, like, okay, so I know that we talked about, neuropathy in her feet. Could you tell me how is this impacting her overall A1C levels? Are they in some way intertwined? Like, tell me a little bit about this. Like, I want to know more. That would stun them that I would ask these questions, like, because it's like, well, now why are you asking that? Wow. Again, because I don't want to assume anything. I'm not the healthcare expert, right? But I have enough education that informs how do I want to see my mom taken care of. It was extremely challenging. That's a professional side. But Donna, I want to bring it home and talk about my personal experience for my mom. And forgive me if I become a little emotional because just talking about this experience, I didn't realize it was going to draw on me in this way this morning. But, being a male, taking care of your mom, those things are usually reserved for, well, I'm a female and I have 2 daughters. My daughters are going to take care of me, right? And my daughters are going to help bathe me because it's most appropriate because of my gender and association with gender. And that just wasn't the case. And at times, hindsight being 2020, I look at the fight for independence when she started to, for the most part, 80% she was able to do for herself. But there were the occasional falls. There were the, night sweats, the waking up with bad dreams and disbelief, like crying. Why is this happening to me? I've done right. I've lived right. I've done well by people. I don't understand this. And the consoling aspect was more so, I imagined, warranted or even desired by my sisters, more so than myself. My mom and I share the same birthday. And so that was a certain closeness that we had with each other. And I used to have to remind her, look, I am your child and I am here for you. Stop resisting me. Like, I just want to be here for you. Stop resisting me. And so there's that aspect of it, right? When we talk about caretaking, that's really unique to Black males or a male showing up, because it could be, I'll tell you, Donna, I also was a caretaker for my grandfather who actually had a dementia and died at 89. he, and I think I may have said that right, you would think that we wouldn't have encountered some of the same resistance, but the loss of autonomy, I think we cannot understate what does that mean for the person being cared for as well, right? Like, I need my independence. Why are you here? So that's extremely hard for you as a caretaker, and it's extremely hard for the person that is receiving the care. I think I went all over the place with this question. I do apologize. I got emotional, and then I kind of went on a tangent. But the experience for the caretaker, for me personally, was one of, well, what qualifies you? My mom would often say, well, your sister went to school for nursing. She could help me. Why are you, and I was just like, but her demand on her job doesn't allow her to be here like mine does. And so I need you to be able to let me like wash your hair. And so what I had to learn real time was you cannot help her if she's falling if you're not willing to fall with her.
Oh,
Get down on the ground. A real time story. Well, not real time, but real true story. My mother fell face planting on the cement. It broke me because the reality that my mom was losing capacity was right before me. I promise I'll stop after this. But
no, please keep going. Please.
I never forget. It was a sunny day outside. It was come back together, MonDarryl. So it was really sunny. It was challenging to be in that space with her, and I was helping her. And she was like, get off me, as she had her thing. She had just completed a dialysis space. She would go in on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And something in that moment, I believe it was divine. I don't like to say something, but I like just sign it. I believe God divinely said, get down on the ground with her. Show her that she's not alone in this. And I got down and I said, Mom, I need you to not fight me. Let me help you. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But I can help you. She allowed me to help her up, got her in the house, cleaned the blood off of her. But that moment sticks with me more than any other because it was truly the realization that my mom was ill. And there was nothing I could do. But I had to show up. And all that I could do, I had to show up. I didn't have the healthiest boundaries at that time, but I knew that I needed to be present. And in that way, it allowed her to be present for herself as well, right? Because she started allowing herself to relax into the space that this was her life now. She wasn't completely without independence. She wasn't completely without autonomy. She could move at will, but there were times where her body just exacted a different demand and was like, no, not today. So for the Black male, I would say, and for the Black female as well, and for the Black other, because I don't want to leave out anyone. I think that we're all going to have different experiences. Let's not try to compare them. Yeah. Just share in the universal norm that we all know what pain feels like. We all know what caretaking feels like. To your point, the quote I love that you said this, we all are in 4 different stages. We'll all be either caretaker, being cared for, and so on and so on. So let's see how can we wed these things together so that we can understand how to best service a person who is in need along with ourselves. And I know that was a long answer. I'm done. I'm done.
This is why I needed you to come on this podcast. This is why, and I just thank you for that, the vulnerability there. Gosh, you are just, when you said, you realized when your mom fell, in that moment, in your spirit, you received it, and you didn't fight it though, to get down there with her. That that imagery is possibly one of the most powerful things I've heard in a long time, MonDarryl. And it's so true. Just like you said, we see it as a caregiver, we see it from our perspective. And a lot of times we are caught up in how their transitioning is making us feel, right? Not even tapping into how in the world they must be feeling when their very bodies that they have known all their lives have carried them through this earth, through everything they've been through. And now it is betraying them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're afraid. They haven't experienced this either. And as a caregiver, one of the things that I do with my caregivers in the coaching area, in the coaching space, is to help them become the best person they can be in that space. That doesn't mean that they have to be, you know, Nightingale. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they have to
Yeah.
be, but how do I show up in this space? How do I do all of the things that have to be done for me to honor my elderly loved one in this way?
Yeah.
And what that looks like, right? So, man, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And you also mentioned something that I think is very important. When we are in these spaces, whether it's in a group coaching setting or just with friends or family, to resist the temptation to compare stories.
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah.
hear you. I need to hear you and what you are experiencing, what your loved one has just experienced,
Yeah.
right? I need to
Yeah.
hear that. And I need to let you know that I hear you, that I see you. I see you.
Yeah.
Wow, that was something. I just thank you so much.
Yeah. One thing I said to myself as I journaled about this sometime later, because again, some of this is really good insight now. Donna, I could say a lot of this right now, right? I could say it's
Yeah.
great insight now because
Yeah.
I've had to peer back, right? There were certainly jewels that um, I feel I allowed myself to be robbed of in that moment because, again, I was so focused on the impact on me because I was young. I'm like, well, dude, I'm just 30. And you're like, well, yeah, your mom's only 51, right? Like, you realize what this is doing to her, right? She's young.
No.
And this is a person who lived really well for the most part. Great diet, you know, um, you know, traveled, did all the things she wanted to do for the most part when her body began to betray her and genetics kind of took over. And so on both sides of my family, mom and father, um, diabetes runs heavy, rampant through our family. Um, type 1 and 2. So we have a mixed bag. That's the thing also, is that in many spaces, many of my family members have not done anything that predisposed them to this by way of diet, right? It's
Wow.
just genetic disposition.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you come back and you look at that space where you have these voices, and my thought process is, if only our voices could see, and if only our ears could see, right? The double amount of what we'll have is this impeccable amount to see folks where they are, right? Like you said, just stop and listen to what their experience is. If only our voices could see what our eyes could, and if only our ears could see what our
Hmm.
eyes could, man, how great that impact would be. Well, that's not reality, right? So then we have to utilize what we have, and that is Take the time to laser in on this person who is at one of 3 points in their lives. And this is what I always think. We all have a need, not just a desire, to be seen, to be heard, and to be experienced. If I am seen and heard, I am experienced. If I am neither of those, I cannot be experienced. Right? So we have to hold space and release ourselves from this comparative state where we're comparing ourselves to those who, well, my mom did too, and my dad did too, and my sister did too. And, it was really bad for me. I hear you and I understand you. And I'll always hold space for either, but we don't have to compare. There's a universal norm here that we all can share in, and that is that we all know what it's like to have stumbled upon a transition that you weren't ready for. That's grief. If you haven't experienced grief, keep living. It'll come knocking at your door.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is something, as you were talking about what you always tell people about being seen, it made me think of, we just want people to know that we were here.
Yeah.
Just that we were here.
Yeah.
And that, what is it all about? What is this all about? I was here, though. You think about that, in high school and stuff, people, children, kids, whatever, teenager would write graffiti on stuff. So-and-so was here,
Yeah.
and I never thought about it until this very second that I'm actually saying this, is that's actually profound. Like, I thought it was just graffiti until I literally just connected that to this, our humanity, to our mortality.
Yeah.
I was here. Good
here.
God. Come on, MonDarryl. This is crazy.
Powerful, right?
It's too much.
Powerful, because it just gives, it's a human need. Like, we're divinely created, I believe, in this way that, we need to be acknowledged. Our existence needs to be acknowledged, no matter what state we're in, right? Whether you're in the state where you require care, or you're in the state where you're giving care, or the state where you're preparing care, whatever that looks like, we all need to be seen. We all need to be heard, and we all need to be experienced. And after all, isn't that the tagline of the Black life? See me. I exist. I'm human. I'm more than a body designed for needs and, all the other things. I am human. I am a person. I am fill in the blank.
Whew. My goodness. Well, we are trying to wrap this up, but this is something I'm definitely going to ask you to come back at some time, because the jewels that you have dropped or even evoked in in my own thought process, I'm sure are going to be stirring to our listeners. So, I want to talk about something that we experience in these United States. And that is something called the Black tax. Can you talk about how the Black tax manifests itself for us while caring for elderly loved ones?
Oh, yeah. It was kind of like what we alluded to earlier, right? When we talk about Black tax. And so for the listeners who don't know, I always like to clarify, that's just my inner trainer coming out, right? And the Black tax is just simply stated like the financial, emotional tax that is placed upon Black folks, right? In these spaces where they are either unable to give or expected to give. I really want to lean more towards the expectation to give, right? This financial. Black women experience this often when they're told that they're strong, right? And,
Yeah.
you're a strong Black woman. Well, when she shows up and she's not strong, that's a form of Black tax. You're not holding space for her emotional vulnerability to say, well, you know what? Oh, sis, I see you. I see that you need some help. But when we deny her that space, we're evoking Black tax. So I want to be careful and note that Black tax not only comes from outside of our community, it comes from within our community, right? So it can be both within and without. But as caregivers, what we see is this financial hardship that is placed on Black families, particularly for those of us who have done well. And if you're in a Black family like myself, I come from very meager, very humble um, background and have now at some point began to build a better life for myself. I won't say that I've escaped the perils of impoverished state 100%, right? But my family seems to think so, right? So that Black tax looks like, well, go to Mondi. He got it. He can do it. Let's go for him for the emotional support, the financial support, and not realizing that that's what this does. So that's two examples of clear internalized Black tax coming from our community. Externally, when we start talking about the professional spaces, I cannot say this enough when we talk about the statistics of infant fetal death, right? That is one jarring one. Talk about the caretaking in that space, and I'll try to try my best to bring these two together. But there is this Black tax that says that you not just are financially expected to give more, not only are you emotionally expected to give more, you physically can actually give more. You can endure more. So let's not give you medications that would help sustain life for you and your child. Let's withdraw those because you're actually stronger. Another form of Black tax, rooted in systemic racism, rooted in this space that there is more of the Black body could withstand. Well, when we talk about that, we cannot not talk about that and talk about what it means for the Black mentality, right? If we're saying that the Black body can sustain more, we're also saying that the Black mental state could sustain more. So we'll beat and we'll beat and we'll beat and we'll beat until you're worn and tattered all out. That weighs on us. So when we talk about caregiving, how I think of this is when you come across a Black woman who has lost her child recently, and she asserts to you that she's not received adequate care, you don't question her, you align with her. Her experiences are real. She's telling you what happened, right? And this is all post. I want to be clear about that. Her experiences are post because she has loss of life that she carried for however many months, because caretakers, professional caretakers, exacted a form of Black tax on her body and on her mind. Well, this must be made up. You can't need drugs to help you. You can't need you. What is wrong with you? We thought that you could handle more. Statistics show us that medically you can handle more, and that is just not true. There is really no biological backing, no scientific backing that shows that isn't flawed at least. And so when we as Black folks, what I try to position us to do is make sure that we eliminate that in our own communities from one another, right? When I show up as a caretaker, particularly saying that I was exhausted some days, there was no one who really held space for me, right? So emotionally, I was expected to show up. But then when you think about men in general, isn't that the expectation? Men are not allowed to be emotionally vulnerable, right? The only thing that I want to see emotionally from you, which is frightening, which is this dual contradiction that we have in society, you're allowed to express anger. You were allowed to express greed or hate as men, but vulnerability, like emotions that I'm tired, I'm sad. You know what? I'm concerned. I don't know what to do with all of these complex emotions. There isn't space that is held for that. And so when we talk about Black tax, I could go all over the place, but I wanted to talk about it, Donna, as you mentioned it, from both an internal and external force. And it's important for us to identify those having power on both ends and saying, well, how can we work against it? How can we combat Black tax within our community? And how can we combat Black tax without our community? Right. Professionally, a few things you could do is give voice to mistreatment. Right. Give voice to mistreatment. Don't take mistreatment. Well, these are the medical authorities and I can't say anything. No, stand up for yourself. Talk about it. Draft reports. Make complaints to the appropriate authorities. Right. And share your experiences. In this age of digital media, we have too much accessibility where our stories can be shared in less than 5 seconds. And support it.
That's right.
Share your story. Yeah. Internally, what it looks like is setting hard boundaries. If there's this old saying, or not so old, but it says, and this is my last talking point, that says, I only go into places where I'm celebrated, not tolerated. Inside your family, if you see that there isn't space for your emotional vulnerability, that's a place that you have to give yourself a hard boundary and say, well, you know what? That place isn't safe for me. So just as you recognize certain caretakers or certain providers outside of you in professional spaces that aren't safe for you, don't hold space for places that aren't safe for you, right? If they're not safe, don't show up. Show up where you're celebrated. Show up where you're seen. Show up where you heard. Show up where you're experienced. If that does not align with your baseline for humanity, that's not a space you should be in.
Woo. Values alignment is what I heard.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wow. I love that. That's necessary. That's necessary. Right. Wow. All right. We're going to wrap up with a couple more here. So are there any self-improvement measures that you personally had to take during your caregiving journey? Was it important? And what were some of those measures?
Yeah. I would say, so again, as I said earlier, because I don't want to lie and say that, I had this figured out. At the time, I didn't. Right. I had, like you said, I was not prepared to be thrusted into the role of caregiving. So I was certainly a representation of what under preparation looks like. At some point, I developed, self-care routines like I'm going to go for a walk today. One of the things that I appreciated was my mom definitely supported this, though. I said, well, you know what, Mom? After I get off, I'm just going to call you before I get off and come home to make sure everything is well before I go. And then I'll go to the gym. If things aren't needed or something like that, could you just let me know? And she was like, yeah, I could do that. That was so supportive. So I remember a few times where she wasn't feeling well. And I was like, well, I'm just going to come on home. I'll make sure that, we get you a meal prepared, And she's like, no, I can do it. I got something already. Go and get your workout in. You need that. When you have a person, like I said, communicating often, communicating early, I identify walks, I identify working out. Now my self-care routine is a beast. My self-care routine now, those measures look like I'm going to take hot baths intentionally. I'm going to make sure I put on meditative music and candles. I'm going to make sure I have Epsom salt with stress relief. I'm going to make sure that I practice tapping. I'm going to make sure that I exercise. I'm going to make sure that I get a good book and I get lost in this book. I suspend my present for what I want to go into this world that doesn't exist to me, right? And I begin to look at those things. Self-care has to be intentional, right? And so I'll tell you, the measure of self-care will really determine how successful you are as a caretaker, both professionally and personally. So that's the long short of that. Self-care, and then again, self-care with intent. Self-care with intentionality, practice intentionality, executed intentionality.
Excellent. That is great. Excellent. Well, like I said, I had several more questions, and you intuitively and skillfully kind of combined a lot of the themes of my questions into your answers. So bonus. Thank you, MonDarryl.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This has just been amazing. want to ask one last thing here is, tell me about what you have been working on. What are some things that you can share with my community that you've been doing? Because I would love to introduce them to you and the amazing work that you do in lots of other areas that tie in some way, some shape into caregiving, and those that may not.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you for holding space for that as well. And thank you again, Donna, before we close out, for having me. Like you said, our initial conversation was just awesome. And so I'm glad that I could support the podcast and come here to just share whatever knowledge I have. I think there's a wealth of knowledge with all of us. So some things that I'm working on now. During the pandemic, I had the amazing opportunity to be the associate producer and casting director of an amazing documentary out now entitled, I get tongue twisted, I apologize. An amazing documentary entitled Hush. It is acronym for Help Us Say Help, and it is targeted towards the Black mental health experience, right? And in this documentary, we explore historically, why haven't we gone to receive help? How is it that we are behind receiving the mental health care that we need to be caretakers of both ourselves and those we love? Short that of there being no preparation plan for slavery, right? So you guys hear me tying all of this, right? So this exit from slavery did not have a preparation plan. And we, unfortunately, are still paying for that today. This is why I can't echo again. Prepare, 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 right? Enough. Make sure that you're prepared. But Hush is an amazing documentary. Again, not only am I the casting director, I'm also a cast member in the film. So if you have an opportunity, it is absolutely complimentary for the month of Black History Month. I invite you all to go to the film. You can go to a38films.org. Again, that's A as in alpha, 38films.org, where the film is being shown all month for free. I've also given Donna the link to share with you all as well. And I think if you're Black, I want to invite you to experience this film because it is truly centered around your well-being and your mental health. And if you're non-Black, I believe that this film also speaks to you in that there are these universal norms, right? Particularly if you are my Latin brother and sister, and you are of the community that so closely resembles that of our experience, where mental health is almost a lowered priority. This will, one, begin to, grind those gears to say, oh, so there is some generational trauma here, and I can overcome this thing. And there are resources and there are tools for me now. I don't have to struggle in silence when there's help all around me. So please go and support the film. Again, it's free for the entire month of Black History. And I thank you all for watching and leaving reviews and sharing your opinion.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, I've watched the documentary. It is fire. Okay. So much information. The reframing of some of our Black experiences they were transformative for me. I'm still thinking about some of the things that you, even as a cast member, and the other cast just dropped. Just so effortlessly, they just dropped this nugget, this information. Oh, wow. I had never thought of some of the things in the way they presented it. So the reframe was everything. And then as well as just being introduced to some new concepts and new ways of thinking. So kudos on the documentary, Hush, Help Us Say Help. You all listen to it. You'll see the link below. Please support Mondi, as I'm going to start saying that because that's what your family calls you and your friends. So now Mondi.
You've been extended. You've been extended in.
Yeah,
Come on
yeah.
in.
This has been amazing.
I accept.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. Bless your heart. Thank you, MonDarryl. This has been awesome. And I am going to go ahead and, well, before I close it out, come back. I'm sure that the community wants to hear more from you, and I'm sure they'll be looking forward to more of your content. So I'm going to make sure they get connected to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I will.
All right. All right.